there, Biol-50. We're going to be talking about the integumentary system today. This does say chapter 7, and in some versions of this book, this may not be chapter 7, but in the edition that we're using this year, the integumentary system is chapter 7. So just a heads up for those of you who might have a used edition of the book. The integumentary system includes all of the organs of the skin. So we're going to talk specifically about what is in the skin. Oops, let me get my, oh, wow, that was new and fun. Let me get my pointers going here. So here's the portion that's going to be skin. And everything inside the skin that allows us to operate, stay warm, and so forth. We're going to be talking about appendages of the integumentary system, which include hair and nails. So here's a side view of what the nails look like. And, you know, I have to be honest, to me, this is kind of creepy, but because just, you know, looking underneath the nail is just, I've like lost so many nails in my life that is just creepy for me. But, you know, it's really important to understand where the nails are coming from because that's definitely an indicator of someone's health. And then we're going to talk about glands. And the example we have here is a mammary gland. There are different kinds of glands in the skin. Some produce oils, some produce sweat. And in this particular case, mammary glands are producing milk for offspring. So let's get going. We're going to be classifying the integumentary system in terms of its function, what it does, and what its structure is. When we talk about the structure, we're definitely going to be talking about the classification of body membranes. In other words, what type of epithelial membranes are making up the skin. We will talk about the appendages, hair, nails and glands. We already kind of mentioned those. But we're also going to talk about receptors, which are tied into the central nervous system. This is giving us an idea of what's happening in the world outside. So some of those will be thermoreceptors. Some of the receptors are actually hairs. We will talk just briefly about disorders of the skin. So let's move on. So what are membranes? Membranes are structures that are made out of cells that are lined up in sheets. And in this case, membranes are covering body surfaces. So keep in mind that a surface can be on the outside of the body or lining the internal cavity of, say, the heart or the lumen of the digestive tract. So membranes are linings and coverings. They line the walls of hollow organs. They also cover the outside of internal organs. So as we go through the rest of the semester, you will be hearing me talk about membranes. There are two categories of membranes, epithelial membranes that we think about like skin membranes. So like on the outside, you have the epithelial tissue, right? Your skin, that we think of skin, but you also have the epithelial linings of those hollow organs. We also have connective tissue membranes. Pardon me. Remember our connective tissues, which include bone, blood, rough fibrous material like tendons and so forth. So we're going to talk about those connective tissue membranes as they pertain to the integumentary system. So let's start with epithelial tissues. Epithelial tissues, or we can say ET just for short because we're going to be writing a lot of notes, include mucous membranes, the cutaneous membrane, our skin. So our skin, the outer skin, we call a cutaneous membrane. We also have these things called serous membranes. Serous membranes are linings of cavities. So like the parietal layer inside of the abdominal cavity, that's the lining that separates muscle from the internal cavity that houses the internal organs like the stomach and the digestive system. We also have this thing called the visceral layer. The visceral layer overlies the organs. So you have two layers between the cavity lining and the organ external lining. So when we look at this more deeply, and we're going to talk about this a whole lot more when we get to the respiratory system, are like the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. One of the things that help me remember the differences between the names of the membranes is visceral. Visceral, or the viscera, are all the internal organs in your abdominal and thoracic cavity. So the visceral pleura overlies and like wraps those organs, kind of like a present, right? So if you think of the organs as the present and then the visceral pleura is the wrapping around the present, okay? The parietal pleura is the thing lining the entire cavity. So in this case, it does look a little funky here with the lungs, the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura makes a little bit more sense, down here in the abdominal cavity, it's not called a pleuria, it's called a peritoneum. So you have visceral peritoneum, parietal peritoneum. Pleuria is just respiratory. Peritoneum is abdominal. Okay. And basically the idea is you have these coverings, these membranes, separating the organs from the body cavity, from just a couple linings, okay? The reason why this happens is because these organs are very delicate. The organs, if they rub around just from our movement, can end up getting things kind of like friction burns, and they'll build up calluses, and that's not good for these real delicate tissues. Another type of membrane is called a synovial membrane, which you find in complex joints like your elbows and your knees. These synovial membranes, I identified here in green, produce a fluid, which is the fluid inside, in this case, your knees. And that helps maintain pressure inside of the joint capsule. And it also helps keep the tissues and the cartilage from bumping each other too hard, although they do that on a regular basis, but it also helps keep them nourished, and it's kind of like lubrication. So the cutaneous membrane, the stuff on the outside, is your actual skin, okay? And it's made of epithelial tissue and connective tissue. And like I said, lines the surfaces of the bodies on the inside and the outside. Mucous membranes secrete mucus. Yay, mucus. What's the point of mucus? I know it seems like it's like really obnoxious, especially when you have allergies. Mucus is intended to move things along and keep stuff out of your system. So let's say, for example, in your respiratory tract, the mucous membranes in your respiratory tract, in your up in your nasal pharynx, the oral pharynx, which is the pharynx is, just so you know, is the back of the throat. The mucous membranes going down into your lungs, they all trap dust, pollen, particles in the environment and push it back up to the pharynx, where you'll either cough it or sneeze it out or swallow it down into your digestive system. That makes a whole lot of sense. You have no idea how much bacteria we breathe in every day, and pollen. We swallow a lot of it, no big deal, because that mucus takes care of it. Same thing happens in the digestive tract, urinary tract, and so forth. Serous membranes, again, also made of epithelial and connective tissues, line the inside and the outside. These are the serous membranes, the parietal and the visceral, right? The pleuria and the peritoneum. So they're wrapping. The visceral always wraps the organs, and the parietal always lines the cavity walls. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the connective tissue. The connective tissues, synovial membranes, what we talked about, lines those spaces inside of the bones. What we call them is the joint capsule, okay? Not necessarily inside the bones. I apologize for that. It's the joint capsule. Synovial membranes, as you're young, produce tons of fluid. As we get older, they slow down a little bit. But as long as you maintain a healthy lifestyle, a healthy weight, a healthy diet, these synovial membranes can continue producing fluid throughout your life and keep you happy and healthy. We are going to learn a whole lot more about this when we hit the skeletal system, but for now, you just need to know what a synovial membrane is, lines the spaces between joints, and produces that synovial fluid. So now let's get back to the big topic of the day, the integumentary system. The integumentary system, as we mostly talk about it, is an external body covering. What is the point of that body covering? Mostly protection. Protection from damage due to chemical abrasion from the environment. Mechanical damage, let's say you run into something like, I don't know, the sidewalk with your knee. Basically, our epithelial tissue, the thickness, and a certain protein called keratin help give us this not exactly super tough, but tough enough outer covering to keep stuff from getting inside, unless there's abrasion, a cut or a skid, right? So you scrape yourself. Chemical damage, keratin helps protect us from. Chemical damage would be things like, obviously harsh acids, really harsh bases like bleach, okay? One of the biggest things in the environment that the integumentary system protects us from is bacterial infection and UV irradiation. Bacterial infection, those little monkeys, or little bacteria, I guess I should say, they're not monkeys, they would love to get under your skin, literally. Your environment underneath the epithelium, okay, underneath the integument, is nice and warm and salty and sweet and watery. Perfect place for them to live, right? We don't want to let those in. Once they get in, we call that an infection, all right? Because they get in there and they start multiplying and living and setting up residence, right? Bad thing. We try to get them out. And that's where when you take microbiology, you'll learn about antibiotics and different techniques to kill bacteria once they get into your body. UV irradiation, obviously UVA and B that come from the sunshine, can damage DNA inside of the nuclei of cells. The way our integumentary system protects us against that is through the production of a protein called melanin. Melanin can actually look black or brown or kind of yellowish, actually kind of a tannish color, hence tan, right? UV irradiation triggers cells to produce more melanin, and those cells overlie the stem cells that make more skin, all right? So the melanin protects the DNA from damage, and that's something that you would learn about in our genetics class, Bio 9. I teach that too, by the way. The last thing that the integumentary system protects us against is desiccation or drying out. But how do I dry out, Dr. Val? Well, yes, you do drink water, you do eat things that contain water within them, but if we didn't have our skin, our external body covering, we're a very wet, squishy thing underneath the skin, right? And so if that skin wasn't there, we would just evaporate out a bunch of our extracellular fluids. So remember, inside of our tissues, let's pretend that's just an epithelial layer, right? You have lots of cells, and each one of those cells has a nucleus and different organelles. Outside, we have extracellular fluid, ECT. Inside, we have intracellular fluid, right? Oops, let's not use blue. That won't work. Intracellular fluid. It's difficult to get that intracellular fluid out. But if you don't have, let's say, for example, if we do not have, let's see if my eraser will work. I want my eraser. Of course not. Pointer options. Eraser, thank you. If we don't have that epithelial layer, all of this lovely fluid can evaporate off. Once you lose your extracellular fluid, guess what goes next? You got it. You've lost the extracellular, the intracellular goes, and then without water, what happens? Bad stuff. So desiccation means to dry out, okay? So one of the great things about being human is that we have this integumentary system and we don't dry out. Frogs have to keep going back to water and sit in water. Frogs, newts, salamanders. Lizards don't, okay? They're a different critter. So their integument protects them because we have, and lizards as well, and snakes, keratin. Enough biology, right? Enough animal biology. So basic functions, the external covering protects. Aids in thermoregulation, helps us lose heat when we need to through sweating. Really important, especially in the summer here in Merced, right? Heat loss increases blood flow to the skin, okay? So by increasing blood flow to the skin, our body is able to lose heat a little bit, so it shunts heat. This also changes, if you remember math, the triangle delta means changes skin color. When you're sweating, you tend to turn red, right? Well, that's because you have blood flow going to the surface of your skin, and I'll show you where in our model in a few minutes. We can also decrease blood flow to the surface of the skin, and that'll make you look a little more pale, a little bit more, you won't have the pink cheeks anymore. This helps us retain heat when it's cold. This integumentary system also lets us get rid of urea and uric acid, which is formed in as a consequence of protein production through sweating. Our liver actually makes urea, which usually leaves out through the urinary system, hence urine, right? And urea is kind of a yellow color. Now, when we have trouble with that, the urea will back up in our integumentary system and will literally look yellow. It actually, even the whites of your eyes, the sclera can turn yellow if urea and uric acid build up in high levels in your skin. We'll talk about that when we talk about the liver, all right? We can get rid of some of that urea through sweating. And one of the last things that the integumentary system allows us to do is make vitamin D. Now, you might remember when you look at your milk container, it says supplemented with vitamin D. Vitamin D is essential for the absorption of calcium. ABS is absorption of, Calcium. Remember, calcium is a divalent cation. The absorption of calcium in our system is essential for maintaining bone health and nervous system function. So some of you have mentioned that in your some of your discussions. So good job for remembering what calcium does, other than bones. So now let's talk about the structure of the skin. The skin in general is made up of the epidermis, the outside, and then the dermis, the deeper part. After that, basically the two outer layers, we have a subcutaneous fat layer. That's not a part of the skin. That's super deep. The subcutaneous fat layer might appear superficial. As we get older, though, that subcutaneous fat layer kind of doesn't go away necessarily, but some of it shifts, shall we say, and certain parts of your body will look thinner because of I'm not going to say rendering, but the changes in subcutaneous fat distribution. The skin itself is, like I said, the primary organ in the integument. We call this a cutaneous membrane, okay? Because it's on the outside, not subcutaneous, cutaneous. Largest organ of the body. It has the epidermis and the dermis. And here's this slide. I try not to make slides with lots and lots and lots of pictures, but that happened here. Now, it looks like I have an overlap here. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. So the epidermis is the outer layer, okay? And this is the part that you see. The epidermis is made up of the striatum corneum, which is the top here. And then you have a lot of layers underneath. Don't worry about that right now. And then we have the striatum germinativum, or it's also called the basal layer. Not B-A-I-S-E-L, that's the herb, right? The basal layer has stem cells in it. We'll get to that in a minute. So let's start with the striatum corneum. It's the thickest, most superficial. Superficial means most shallow. It's made up mostly of dead cells that are constantly sloughing off. It says right here there are middle layers that are many layers that are constantly rising up. We'll look at that in more detail shortly, maybe a little bit more detail shortly. But basically the idea is down here in the striatum germinativum, what you have is a layer of stem cells always undergoing mitosis, producing new cells that are rising up. These cells down here are still alive, and they contain lots and lots and lots of keratin. We call those keratinocytes, right? The keratinocytes, site just means like little cell, basically. Okay, and what they do is they migrate upwards, and as time goes on, they die, they lose their nucleus, and by the time they lose their nucleus, they end up here in the striatum corneum, which is where you have the sloughing layer. Okay, and we have a few cell layers of the sloughing happening. The stratum lucidum is this layer right here, this kind of dark layer. That's a transition layer between the super dead, super flat cells that are sloughing off and the striatum granulosum, which is this region down here. Okay, so this is the lucidum. And this pink layer right here underneath the lucidum is the granulosum. The granulosum is where the keratinocytes live. Okay, and they're being pushed up. The striatum granulosum also has within it other cells like Merkel cells, but also cells that are pigmented. So you will see if melanocytes are busy producing lots of melanin, the melanocytes live down here near the striatum germinativum, and they inject, it's pretty cool, they literally put pieces of melanin-containing globs, I don't want to get too detailed, into the keratinocytes, and then they start looking more tan, more brown, right? Or black, depending on how much melanin is being produced, so that the tissue gets darker to protect the germinativum from UV damage. Okay, so that's the epidermis. Do you need to know all those layers? Pretty much. Striatum corneum, striatum lucidum, striatum granulosum, striatum germinativum, and kind of what lives in each layer. The dermis is deep to the epidermis. So this whole region here from the striatum germinativum all the way here to where the subcutaneous fat picks up is the dermis. These little bumps are called the dermal papilla. The dermal papilla are found within the papillary region, okay? The papillary region is this upper region here, okay? It has these little bumps, but it also includes this region here, okay? The reticular region is farther down. So I would say you have like, here's the papillary, here's the reticular, and then down here is the subcutaneous region, which contains the fat, okay? So what's going on with the dermis? It's deep to the epidermis, has lots of connective tissue, highly vascular. This is where when you get a scratch or a cut, this is where you bleed from. Superficial bleeding, right? You're not going to bleed a ton. You bleed a lot if you get down here into the subcutaneous layer, though. There's lots of elastic fibers right here, which makes sense. If you pinch your skin and pull it up on your arm, it's flexible and it's pliable. It snaps back. Those elastic fibers allow the stretchiness of your skin. And that's a good thing, because if you were to stretch, like stretch up to reach something high on a shelf, you would rip. Now, the collagen fibers that we find within the dermis allows pliability, strength, so that you actually don't rip. Now, let's talk a little bit about this papillary region. This is the upper region here. You have all these wave-like little ups and downs. This is a part of, oh, look at that. I have THE and THE. Wow, I have to fix that typo. The contours of the papillary region on the tips of your fingers on the thick skin give rise to those ridges that we call fingerprints, and those are all unique to each individual. The reticular region itself is the lower region down here, the reticular. I kind of already made an R. This lower region has a really dense set of connective tissue. So this is a looser set of connective tissue. This is the more dense, all right? So it's a lot stronger. It does have collagen and elastin, but I would think more of this as like bungee cords, and this down here as more of a net, all right? Makes the skin super strong, but yet still pliable. Again, bear in mind that you have all these capillaries coming up through the skin, up to the papillary layer for gas exchange. Hairs go all the way through this section. All these little purple lines here are stem cells. We'll get to that later. And then you have these smooth muscle cells called erector pili muscles. This is what allows the hairs to stand up on your skin when you're cold to help keep you warm, but also you might get goosebumps, let's say, when you get scared or something freaky happens. The last layer is our subcutaneous fatty layer. Lots of areolar connective tissue. Areolar connective tissue is kind of like this unorganized collagen and elastin. It's not super dense, and you have a lot of adipose tissue. The areolar connective tissue kind of holds the adipose in place, all right? And the adipose is there to insulate our bodies. You'll notice that the adipose tissue surrounds larger blood vessels. That helps insulate your body temperature, because if you don't have insulation, the warm blood circulating through these blood vessels will just lose heat. So it's kind of like if you think about the blood vessels being like pipes carrying hot water, fat is insulating your pipes. At least that's the way I have to think about it. Now, the appendages of the skin. We have hair, receptors, which could be thermoreceptors, motion receptors, which are also called mechanoreceptors, nails, and glands. So let's start with hair. Back to this picture again. One of the things I want to encourage you to do is on the canvas side, I put a model or a picture of human skin, which is kind of like this, but a little bit more detail. One of the things that you will find is that the model of human skin has all the different tissues associated with it. Epithelial, connective, muscular, and muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Here's a cutaneous nerve, a skin nerve. So the skin is a perfect model for all the tissues of the body. So it's really important to understand it. So let's start with hair, which is the first appendage of the skin that's probably very noticeable on a lot of people and a lot of critters too. We have millions of hairs on your body, everywhere, with the exceptions of the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, your fingers, the sides of the fingers, and the sides of the toes. Some people have hair on top of their toes. Your lips and parts of the genitals also may not have hair, depending on who you are. Now, lanugo is the hair that babies are born with, and it's this really soft, fleecy hair. And lanugo is a Latin word for down. It means like downy fur. When babies are born too early, they have lots and lots of extra lanugo. They're fluffy. They're kind of fuzzy. Eventually, that lanugo becomes replaced some of them, not all, but most of them, replaced with stronger pigmented hair on your arms and on your legs and so forth. So the parts of the hair are the hair shaft, all right? So here's the hair itself. So the hair shaft is actually the thing that you see. That's what we consider hair. So if you touch your hair on your head, what you're touching is the hair shaft. The root goes down deep into the skin. All right, so here's the hair root. And then you have the hair follicle. The hair follicle is this purple area all the way around the hair. The papilla of the hair is way down here on the bottom, and the papilla is where basically new components of the hair is built. All right. The follicle itself, this whole hair follicle, has epithelial cells, which are these purple cells, surrounding the root, making new parts of the actual hair shaft. The new cells are produced in the follicle and pushed upwards, which is how the hair grows. As those cells become keratinized, they die. So as hair as hair grows out of the hair shaft, and it becomes, out of the hair follicle and becomes a shaft, the hair is actually dead, all right? There's not a lot of DNA inside of the hair shaft. Occasionally you can come across a few cells that might still have DNA in them, but for the most part, these cells are dead and they contain no nucleus. Melanocytes, again, producing yellow, brown, or black pigment, and sometimes even reddish pigment, are what's going to be coloring the hair shaft. The erector pili muscles, like I mentioned, are the muscles, the pieces of smooth muscle that when they contract, pulls the hair shaft vertically so that the hairs stand up. And this is usually to, again, insulate us. So if all these little hairs are standing up, it'll trap heat underneath the hair layer. We also call those goosebumps. And again, hair is dead material. They're dead cells. All right, let's talk about the receptors within the skin. Direct changes from the environment are called stimuli. In other words, direct changes in temperature, direct changes in pressure, direct changes in motion, all right? So like wind. Those are all things in the environment that are going to be signaling to us, hey, there's something happening here. There are three basic types of receptors. They're the Meissner's corpuscles. Meissner's corpuscles are right here. They look like little wrappings, little circles, not circles. They look like a turban, actually. And they fit way up here into the dermal papilla. They give you an idea of light pressure or light touch. Meissner corpuscle activation is what you feel when you just rub your arm with your hand, or like when somebody gives you a hug. That's what you feel. It's a pleasurable, usually, activation. Pacinian corpuscles are deeper. Pacinian or laminated, they're called laminated because they have layers, i.e. lamina. These corpuscles are deeper and they give you an idea of pressure. Now, sometimes the pressure is okay, like it'll tell you if your pants are too tight, but it will also tell you if like your brother punches you in the arm, right? Yeah, like I don't know anything about that. I do have a brother and he punched me in the arm plenty of times. I grew up with all boys, like all boy cousins. I got punched in the arm a lot. So my Pacinian corpuscles got used to that, right? Ha ha ha. For real, they got punched in the arm a lot. So Meissner's and Pacinian corpuscle give you the sensation of pressure. Meissner's is light pressure. Pacinian is deeper pressure, harder pressure. Now the free nerve endings, so there are some free nerve endings that extend up to the dermal papilla layer. These respond to changes in temperature. They respond to changes in gases in the environment. How would you get a change in gases in the environment? You would cut your skin and oxygen would get in there. Have you ever cut yourself? Have you ever gotten a paper cut and you know what happened, but it doesn't hurt yet? And then it opens up and boom, it hurts, right? Part of that is because you've severed those free nerve endings. Part of it's also that gases get in there pretty quickly. Oxygen gets in there and basically your skin is telling, the receptors are telling your brain, hey, you just cut yourself. The next appendage of the skin are the nails. So what's the point of the nails? The nails protect actually the terminal ends of the fingers and the toes. What's the point of that? Well, it's not necessarily to scratch yourself, right? It's protection of those thinner parts of your body. Those thinner parts of your body are important for sensation. Nails are produced by cells in the epidermis underneath, okay, making lots of dense keratin-containing cells. So this region down here, the nail root, is producing the nail body. From there, we have the free edge, all right, which is out here. This is the long part of your nail. So when your nails grow out long, that's your free edge up here. The nail body itself is just the part of the nail over, covering the tip of your finger. The lunella is the white half moon here. Some people have larger lunellas than other. The cuticle is a skin fold from which the nail root extends farther back, and that's just a deeper embedding of the nail itself. And again, nails grow nails grow in this direction, right? We know that because the free edge gets longer, but nails also grow in this direction. And again, nails are really hard tissues composed of lots and lots of keratin. So I hope by now you guys are starting to see that keratin is a super strong molecule, protective molecule. It may or may not look orange or yellow, but keratin is super strong. The body uses that exteriorly for protection a lot. Now let's talk about glands. We're talking about exocrine glands. Exocrine glands produce secretions that are on the surface of the body. Each exocrine gland, so exo for exit, for production of stuff that exits the gland itself onto the surface. Exocrine glands have ducts, so the secretions go onto the surface via skin ducts. There are a couple different types of glands. There are the sudoriferous glands and the sebaceous glands. Sudoriferous glands are technically sweat glands. Sweat glands is like the non-formal term for sudoriferous glands. They're found everywhere on your skin. You may or may not have a lot of them. Different people have a different distribution. We have eccrine and apocrine sudoriferous glands. The eccrine sweat glands are the ones that you find pretty much everywhere in the body. It produces watery sweat, salty sweat, super important for heat loss. When you are hot and sweating, and like in the summer, when you're running in the summer and you're sweating profusely, your eccrine sweat glands are dumping salty sweat out of your body to try to help you cool through evaporative cooling. Apocrine glands are a little bit different. We say that these are axillary glands. Axillary meaning they're in your armpits, right? Or in the genital area. What they do is they produce sweat that has lots of proteins and fatty acids in it. Why is that there? Well, bacteria that are friendly to our body live around the apocrine sweat glands, and the apocrine sweat glands feed those bacteria. The apocrine glands can become activated under periods of stress, so you can sweat under your armpits when you're very, very, like stressed out. And it produces an odor because those bacteria live there. It's not the actual sweat that smells bad, it's the bacteria. And the bacteria are kind of making an odor because, well, they're eating. That's what bacteria do. A lot of times when they're eating, they produce gases. And when they produce gases, mostly they're not good. I can't think of a bacterial culture that I've ever thought smelled great. And that includes anything under your armpits. So there you go. Apocrine are the private sweat glands. Eccrine are the public sweat glands. Let's just put it that way. All right. Sebaceous glands are different. They produce oil. Oil is technically called sebum in your body, okay? These oils can be a looser oil that you'll find in your skin, like on your face. Acne is the result of too much sebum or oil being produced from from glands around your hairs. These oils are important to keep the hairs healthy and pliable and shiny looking, right? However, when debris gets in there or bacteria and it starts living in that sebum, in that oil, it produces acne. And so the sebaceous gland blockage is a pimple, all right? Now, there's another type of sebum that you'll find inside of the auditory canal, inside your external auditory canal, right? Your ear canal. That's called, we call it earwax. That's called auditory sebum. The earwax can come as kind of a greasy, wet type of earwax or very flaky, dry earwax. Either way, it's still an oil that's intended to trap stuff, dust, Hopefully not insects. Oh, yet another creepy idea. But keeps your ear canals clean and keeps stuff from getting all the way down to the tympanic membrane, which we'll talk about later. So let's talk briefly about a couple or at least one disorder of the skin, which is a burn. A burn is tissue damage that induces cell death caused by heat. Another thing that can cause a burn is electricity or UV radiation, hence sunburn, right? Or a chemical burn. Why is this life-threatening? Mostly because it kills the skin and it leads to fluid loss. Dehydration and electrolyte imbalance will cause a problem called circulatory shock. Circulatory shock happens when the kidneys are no longer functioning properly, and there's a lot of, let's just say, chemical signaling in the system brought on by the inflammation of the burn, producing toxins, and basically your body gets poisoned by the dead debris, all right? The dead skin debris. A first-degree burn, let's go over to the infection. Bacteria can take over after, the skin is opened up. They do rapidly divide. Some bacteria, the population doubles every 20 minutes. All right, so that's a bad deal. And the immune system becomes depressed because basically you have a loss of circulation to an area, and you have this constant fluid loss, this desiccation or dehydration happening. There are 4 types of burns. A first-degree burn, which is only the epidermis, you'll get, it'll hurt. You'll get swelling and usually a color change. The skin will look red, but it heals within a couple days. This is something that might happen, hopefully that's the simplest of your sunburns. The second-degree burn hurts a whole lot more. So here's the first degree. Basically, just your epidermis, a little bit deeper, just this, basically the most superficial part of the dermis might get hit. Second degree burn, you have quite a degree of thickness happening. You injure the epidermis and the most of the dermis, actually. It says upper dermis, but most of the dermis, frankly. It gets blistered. It's really painful. The epithelium can regenerate, but it takes time. Sometimes there is scarring. Sometimes you're usually okay, though. Most of the time you're okay. Third degree burn is really bad. It goes all the way down to the fat, the subcutaneous fat, the junction between the fat and the muscle layer. This doesn't really hurt because you've destroyed all the pain receptors. The tissue looks like, they say blanched. It looks cooked, okay? You look like the rotisserie chicken at Costco. The tissue can also look blackened depending on how the burn happened. Regeneration doesn't work here because the stem cells that give rise to new tissue are gone. So skin grafts are necessary for regenerating tissue over these areas. Fourth degree, that's brutal. That's where the burn gets all the way down to muscle and bone, and this happens a lot during electrocution. In this case, you have to remove all of the tissue, everything, because it's down dead to the bone, and sometimes you need to remove bone. So you'll have to have a bone graft, muscle, skin graft. This is a very severe bone and a very severe burn, and difficult to recover from. So burns, bad thing, bad disorder of the skin. All right, that's it for the integumentary system. Catch you on the next chapter.